This is Puerto Rico, a small tropical island located about 1,000 miles off the coast of Florida, surrounded by Caribbean nations like the Dominican Republic and Jamaica. On the surface, Puerto Rico may seem like just another island in the region, yet its story is unlike that of its neighbors. Since the late 1800s, Puerto Rico has been tied to the United States, but not as a state. Instead, it's an unincorporated territory, neither a state nor fully independent. It's a place stuck in limbo, and this complex relationship has defined its history and struggles. You might think that being part of the wealthiest country in the world would make Puerto Rico rich, but the reality is far different. Despite its unique status, the island has remained in a state of poverty for over a century. Imagine being connected to one of the most powerful nations, yet still your dreams are limited by the decisions of others. The US has held Puerto Rico back, keeping it economically dependent and underfunded. If Puerto Rico were an independent country, its economy would be the second largest in the Caribbean, just behind the Dominican Republic. On a per capita basis, its income sits at about $41,000, higher than many European nations. But life here for many is a far cry from prosperity. The island faces a long list of challenges: economic depression, a shrinking population, crushing debt, government mismanagement, natural disasters, and more. The contrast is stark. Puerto Ricans are US citizens, but they don't enjoy the same rights as those living on the mainland. They're subject to federal laws and eligible for the draft, but they have no voice in the laws that govern their lives. It's as if their voices don't matter. For decades, Washington has turned its back on Puerto Rico, ignoring its needs and treating it as an afterthought. Despite having a population of around 3 million people, just like Mississippi, one of America's poorest states, Puerto Rico gets a fraction of the financial support. Mississippi receives 10 times more Medicaid funding, yet Puerto Rico's poverty rate is nearly 5 times greater than that of the mainland. The economic impact is undeniable. Between 2004 and 2017, Puerto Rico's economy shrank by 14%. This is not just a decline, it's one of the steepest in modern history for any nation that wasn't at war. The result? A mass exodus. More people have left Puerto Rico in the last 5 years than at any time since the Great Puerto Rican Migration after World War II. Why is Puerto Rico in this position? Why has the US deliberately kept it poor, despite the island's vast potential? The answer lies not in the benefit of the average American, but in the benefit of the few, the wealthy big businesses that profit from this imbalance. Even when the American people are struggling, Puerto Rico suffers even more. The financial crisis, the rising inflation, these issues are affecting Americans everywhere. Yet, some have found alternative investments that make them richer, including platforms like Masterworks, which allows people to invest in fine art. But Puerto Rico wasn't always part of the United States. Its colonial history stretches back centuries, beginning with Spain, who named the island Puerto Rico, meaning rich port. For nearly 400 years, the island's economy relied on the forced labor of native peoples and African slaves. Sugar, tobacco, and coffee were cultivated and exported to Europe, enriching Spain. This cycle of exploitation continued until the late 1800s, when the US began eyeing Puerto Rico for its strategic location in the Caribbean. The US fought Spain for control of the island, and in the end, Puerto Rico became part of America's empire. Unlike the Philippines, which eventually gained independence, Puerto Rico's fate was sealed as an unincorporated territory, one of the oldest remaining colonies in the world. The US didn't grant Puerto Rico autonomy. Instead, they imposed federal laws that restricted the island's independence. In the process, Puerto Rico was molded into a colony that served the economic interests of the mainland. America exploited Puerto Rico's natural resources, especially sugar. The island's climate was perfect for growing sugarcane, and production was cheaper here than in Louisiana. In the early 20th century, policies like the Jones Act of 1917 imposed heavy burdens on Puerto Rico's economy. It required all goods to be transported on US-owned ships, driving up the cost of living for the people who were already underpaid. Despite this, the US kept pushing the island as a success story, a model capitalist economy with promises of growth and prosperity. But behind the facade, the profits largely flowed back to the mainland. In the years following World War II, the US embarked on a series of policies to modernize Puerto Rico's economy. Operation Bootstrap, as it was called, aimed to shift the island from an agricultural to an industrial economy. But there was a catch. While the policies promised economic growth, they were designed to benefit US businesses, not Puerto Ricans. Companies came to Puerto Rico, lured by tax breaks and cheap labor, but the people saw little of the profits. From 1950 to 1980, Puerto Rico's per capita income grew by nearly 10 times, and its economy seemed to be on the rise. But this boom was short-lived. The policies that had sheltered the island from the outside world began to fade, and when they did, Puerto Rico lost its competitive edge. The US tried to help, passing tax breaks for companies, but once again, these benefits didn't go to the people. Instead, big American businesses took advantage of these new measures, shifting profits back to the mainland without reinvesting in Puerto Rico's infrastructure or workforce. The island became more dependent on the US, and when the tax breaks were revoked in the late 1990s, Puerto Rico's economy collapsed. The loss of investment, combined with the bursting of the real estate bubble, triggered an economic crisis. Puerto Rico couldn't file for bankruptcy, and without state status, it couldn't seek assistance from the IMF. The government was forced to implement austerity measures, cutting jobs and reducing public services. What followed was nothing short of a disaster: job losses, a devastating brain drain, and spiraling debt. Young people left the island for better opportunities on the mainland, and the population continued to shrink. Those who stayed faced a constant battle against poverty, with inadequate public services and mounting debts. The government was left to borrow money just to keep the lights on, racking up debt at unsustainable levels. The US government, while quick to reap the benefits of Puerto Rico's labor and resources, has been slow to offer real support when the island needed it most. In 1996, when the Clinton administration decided to phase out tax incentives, it set off a chain of events that would lead Puerto Rico to its current crisis. Federal policies had no replacement, and the US largely ignored the island's financial struggles until it was clear that Puerto Rico couldn't repay its debt. Today, the situation remains grim. Puerto Rico is still caught in a cycle of poverty and mismanagement, its future uncertain. Puerto Rico's plight isn't just a result of bad governance. It's the direct consequence of a century-long pattern of exploitation, neglect, and systemic inequality. And until the US addresses the structural issues that have kept Puerto Rico in a state of dependency, it will remain trapped in this endless cycle. The island's struggle is a reminder of what happens when power is used to keep a place down, when potential is stifled, and when people are left to fend for themselves with little hope of real change. It's a tragedy that could be avoided, if only Puerto Rico were truly given the chance to stand on its own.